So, first thing I want to talk about is about writing.
Okay.
Uh,
Do you want to be a writer?
well, that's actually something interesting. I don't necessarily know if I want to be a writer, but I think that writing would be very therapeutic.
It is therapeutic, yes. Yeah.
And I've always had a fear of writing because of my dyslexia,
Uh-huh.
and even reading is a big problem for me as well.
But yet you got through college.
I got through college,
Yeah.
so I managed okay.
Yeah.
I think that's why I escaped to the math and science side of things. I didn't have to read as much. But there's the babies that I do here.
So you like audiobooks probably more than some people.
Right. So when I started to have long commutes,
Yeah.
audiobooks and podcasts were the things that I was fascinated by, and I kind of love doing those.
Do you think Trump is dyslexic?
Yes, I do. I
'Cause
think he's too vain to admit it,
Yes.
but I think he is dyslexic.
Yeah.
He doesn't read teleprompters.
Right.
He never has any speeches. He's always just going off the cuff.
Yes.
And I can see him struggling when any time someone hands him something to read.
Yes.
So I really think he's dyslexic, and a lot of people want to say other things about it, but I think it's a very interesting subject.
Maybe that's one reason he hates the press, because he can't read it? Or?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, he just watches Fox News.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, you're going to ask me about writing.
So yeah, part of what I guess I want to write, and this is something that my friend Dan Thron has been trying to get me to do, is to write a script.
A movie script.
A movie script. So I had this idea that I'm going to do, and I want to sort of explore it. And I want to sort of do it, I guess it's going to be a slightly autobiographical, but somewhat fictional at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Transreal.
Transreal, that's right.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about, so when I first got introduced to your books, it was through my mother, right?
Uh-huh.
I didn't know anything about you, and like I said, I didn't really read that much.
Yes.
But I started reading some sci-fi books.
Yes.
All but more later. And I started reading some Arthur C. Clarke and things like that. And my mother said, well, you should read Uncle Rudy's books. And
Well, that's nice of her. Yeah.
And I said, oh, well, tell me about Uncle Rudy. And I started reading into it, and I was like, wow, this is great. The first one I read was Software, and then Wetware after that.
Yes.
And then I started reading The Hacker and the Ant.
Yeah, that's sort of about Silicon Valley.
Right.
There aren't all that many novels about Silicon Valley
No.
that are sort of realistic. And
Right. But it also felt like, based on what my mother was telling me about you, it felt somewhat a little bit autobiographical in a sense.
yeah, it was about me working at Autodesk for
Right.
a couple of years. Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought it was really fascinating. I loved the idea that it sort of went into a science fiction world, and it had all these really amazing things. But I've always wondered about writing. Like, what's the process that you go through when you're writing, and what are the ideas that spawn those things?
Well, probably the main thing about writing that is always not obvious to somebody starting is that it takes a long time. You have to do rewrites. Like a story, I might do 10 rewrites.
Right.
A novel, I'll do at least, well, again, each chapter I print it out, I go over it, I mark it up, I redo it.
Right.
I do that. While I'm going through, I'll do maybe 3 or 4 rewrites on every few pages, and then the whole thing's done, you set it aside, and then you have to rewrite it again. But that's one aspect of it. Another aspect, though, is getting started. There's the fear of the blank page. And there it just, you have to somehow get a voice going in your head, and then you write down what it says.
Right.
To me, it's almost like I'm seeing and hearing the things I'm writing. I get in a state where I'm sort of visualizing it and hearing the characters talk. And to get to that point, I have to have a fairly clear idea of the characters.
Right.
On the other hand, it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. It's not really possible to get a really thorough, complete outline of what you're going to do, at least for me, before I've actually started writing on it.
Okay.
So it's the outline. In some sense, I write the outline while I'm writing the novel.
Okay.
It's sort of a parallel thing. And at no point is the outline set in stone, because it's always, there's There's a whole computational reason for that. It's the fact that it's hard for a complex computation to emulate itself. Or put it another way, if you have a complex computation, there's no way to predict the outcome. There's no speed up for a universal Turing machine.
Okay.
So if I'm working at the limits of my ability, I'm doing the most complex computation I'm capable of.
Right.
And so it's not like there's going to be some back of the envelope shortcut to predict what I'm going to do.
Okay.
Because if there were, then I wouldn't, in fact, be working it. And there's a whole theory about this. This kind of Alan Turing proved these results.
Okay.
And so it applies to a lot of things in life. But one of them is that you shouldn't get too hung up on the outline. You need to just start writing.
Right. Just start writing.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, because the way that I'm thinking about my stories is to write just a series of smaller stories and see if they all combine into a longer story at some point. Because there are sort of different parts or different events that I'm thinking about, and just writing a story about each of the events.
That's a very good approach, particularly when you're starting out. A novel's a little daunting.
Right.
It's sort of like rowing across the Atlantic, you
Right.
know. And
It's okay.
we're in the Los Gatos roasting coffee shop, and there's a baby crying. The mother's dandling it. It may yet calm down.
It's all right.
I don't know. How about another question?
Okay. Let's talk about your nonfiction that you've been writing. You gave me a book last time I was here, which was a couple years ago, on your book on Bruegel.
Yes.
And your passion about art and art history.
Yes.
So, where did that come from? Where does your passion for art and art history come from?
Well, I always have loved art. My wife and I, your cousin, Sylvia,
Yeah.
we, throughout our courtship and marriage, going to museums together has always been something that we like to do.
Right.
We're both sensitive to art. My mother was an artist. Both my daughters are artists.
Right.
And I'm an artist. I paint.
Right.
By now, I've sold about 40 paintings. So
Yeah.
I'm sort of semi-pro.
No, they're great paintings.
Thanks.
Yeah, they're great paintings, and you post them up on Facebook.
Yeah, I just put one up today.
Right.
And also, I like painting because it's different from using a keyboard, you know, because keyboard is so digital, you know, there's the keys, and whether, particularly if I used to do computer work, and now I still do web maintenance work, and that's sort of computery and very digital. And writing it's not really digital, but yet I am using the keyboard.
Right.
And it's sort of pleasant to just have paint, and it's messy, and there's these theories about how to mix colors, but I never can keep them straight in my head.
Right.
You just mush them around until you see what you want to see.
Right.
And I like that. And that's also, painting is very much something, it's that same process where it's, an old master, they might have done this incredibly detailed, they called it a cartoon, but a detailed drawing, underdrawing. But the way that I paint, or many people would paint, is just to sort of start on the canvas and see what you end up with.
Right.
And often I'll have a theme that I want to do, but it doesn't have to be planned very well. So art, I like it because it's a different language. It's so much of the things that you hear on the media are about what you might call low chakra energies. You know, they're about power. I hated history. That was my least favorite subject in school because it wasn't the history of science, it wasn't the history of art. It was the history of politicians and kings, you know, and wars.
Yeah.
And to me, I've just always...
We used to call the History Channel the War Channel.
The War Channel, yeah. And I have friends that love to watch it, but
Right.
to me, it's despicable. It's beneath contempt. It's just the whole subject. I was a draft dodger during the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So I just never bought into that.
Interesting that so when I was in undergraduate, I was a double major in math and also in art as well. And the way that the art degree was at Colgate was you basically had to take art and art history combined.
Good.
And so when I got into art history, I sort of started getting into the modern arts, my modern art class, and I learned some of the early parts of modern art in the 20s and stuff. The sort of relationship that they were starting to develop between math and art, and I sort of, my brain just went, oh my God, art can be related to some of the other subjects I'm engaged with.
Yes.
And I got fascinated by it, and then my art history teacher was so excited that I enjoyed this because I was one of the only people in the class that could sort of understand it. But I really loved the idea of the early Cubism, all of those things, and the futurists thinking about.
It's interesting that you mentioned that.
Right.
Just yesterday, there's a woman who, she was a student of mine, oh God, like in 1978 or something, and she corresponds with me sometimes.
Right.
And she was saying, I wish you would talk about the relationship between art and math in your own practice.
Right.
And so this is like, the world is full of synchronicity, so now you show up today and ask me that question.
Well, what do you think about the relationship between math and art?
Well, let me first mention some specific thing you mentioned. Cubism always fascinated me. And it has sort of something to do with the fourth dimension also.
Yeah.
There's a book by Linda Dalrymple Henderson about Cubism and the fourth dimension. Interesting book. And that was, as a boy, when I heard about the fourth dimension in these early science fiction stories I read, I was just entranced with the idea that there could be this other direction that we can't point in. And then perspective is also, just the mathematics of perspective is very interesting.
Yeah.
I get sort of, it's one of those things I thought I understood, and then like anything with math, I never really understand it until I get obsessed with it and start making lots of drawings and figuring out the first principles for myself.
Well, one of the things I did at the end of college, and so this is around 1993 or so, as I was learning Mathematica, and I had the exact same questions that you just asked about perspective. What is the math of perspective, and now what happens if I add another dimension to everything?
Yes.
And so I did a WXYZ perspective program that would basically create a three-dimensional shadow of a four-dimensional object.
Yeah, I did that too.
Yeah. I loved it.
Yeah, I had my students do that with me, the hypercube.
The hypercube, and I also did a Klein bottle as well.
Right. Yeah, the cheap way to do it is just to do an isometric projection down. Right. But it's kind of cooler to do a perspective projection. It looks freakier and more warped.
And you can get to see things turn inside out.
Inside out. I love it when the cube turns inside out.
Yeah.
And I've also, the fractals, the Mandelbrot set is a huge fascination to me. And I got into it. There's a cubic form of the Mandelbrot set that is strangely neglected. I invented it. It's called the Rudy set.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can find it online.
Okay.
And then the other, I got very interested in cellular automata, particularly continuous valued cellular automata, which people who do partial differential equations sometimes use that for a numerical method.
Okay.
You break the thing up into a grid, and you put a real number, a floating point number in each cell, or maybe a couple of them. And then you might average it with its neighbors or subtract the previous value, and you can get a wave happening or all sorts of things. And everybody knows about the digital CAs, cellular automata, like Game of Life, but continuous valued, also curiously neglected. But as I mentioned to you a minute ago, I've just recently been playing with this program called Kapow. It's a cellular automata emulator, and it gets the most beautiful images. And now I've been thinking, I printed some of those images, and I might paint them. It's the thing is, if you do an abstract painting and you just start slapping things on, there's a danger that a lot of those paintings look the same.
Right.
It's like there's that dance director. He said, I don't like to have my dancers improvise because they always do the same thing.
Which is funny.
Yeah.
It's ironic.
Yeah. But I thought, if I could print out some nice CA images and then paint them. The thing is, paint, it'll be messy and funky, and it won't be exactly right, but it'll be fun anyway.
Right.
It's shapes. I love looking at shapes. That's a sort of intersection between art and math. I've been shooting photographs for 60 years now. I got my first camera about 60 years ago.
Right.
And I'm glad I have a blog because that gives me a venue for my photos.
Okay.
I mean, I've never wanted to get into trying to sell them or display them. I mean, life is miserable enough trying to sell my writing. I don't want to ruin every single thing I do.
Right.
By trying to commercialize it. But I've gotten this eye where I'll see things and then the shapes. And the thing is, math teaches you a lot about surfaces and forms. Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful book by David Hilbert and a man called, I forget his first name. His last name is Cohn Vossen. And it's a book from like some small publisher like Open Court or something like that. And it's called Geometry in the Imagination.
Oh.
And it's just all the lectures that Hilbert gave, just sort of fun lectures. But since he's Hilbert, you know, he won't just stop, you know, he'll just delve on. He won't say, here's the hypercube. He say, and then here's the 5 other regular polytopes, you know, and delve into it all. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And I learned a lot about shapes from looking at that book.
Yeah. Yeah, those are some of my math classes that were some of my favorites. Was my geometry class.
Yes.
My topology class, and my abstract algebra class, which was the least visual, but the one that really sort of. I think abstract algebra opened up my imagination more than anything.
That's interesting.
Even though it wasn't necessarily graphical or representational in a lot of ways.
Well, for me, the non-visual one that I liked was set theory.
Oh, yeah.
And then I got my PhD in transfinite set theory.
Okay.
There's some really beautiful things there.
Yeah. So what do you think about, since you obviously have a large background in computer science as well, and I'm sort of fascinated by a lot of what's going on in the technology side, how that's going to change things. I've been going to a lot of the GPU conferences now, and a lot of things that's happening in terms of massive parallel computing. And I'm curious because a lot of what's happening, let's relate it back to the yard thing, is a lot of the examples they keep using is the computer that generates art on request in a lot of ways, which is very kind of disturbing.
Well, that's sort of a scam.
Yeah.
So there's this thing they do now in ads and short art videos and movies. They get a quartet of 4 notes, like da 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 da, and they just play that over and over. They put it on a loop, and they might play it 1,000 times, in a couple of minutes. And they think they're making music, but they're not. It's just unbelievably irritating.
Yeah.
It's wallpaper.
Yeah.
And the same thing, speak of wallpaper, I mean the drum on rap and disco,
Right.
Wallpaper, just leaden. And it's not that hard to tweak those algorithms. I mean, you can already do it, but for some reason they don't. To put a little bit of chaos in it,
Right.
Just slip a little logistic attractor in there, so it's like Charlie Watts, it'll go ahead a little, it'll back up. And then the other thing, looking at these cellular automata again, what makes them nice is they're being generated on the fly. And again, they're complicated computations, so you can't predict them. So you're watching ineffective video, but it's not a video that's canned. It's not a loop.
Right.
It's just being generated in real time.
Okay.
I mean, you mentioned earlier that people are starting to do ray tracing in real time, but there's all sorts of effects you can do in real time. And that's where it's sort of, you can't be too tight-ass about it. When people want to do generated art, they're tight-assed about it, and they say, I'm going to assign these parameters, and it's going to generate something of a certain type, and I kind of know what it's going to look like.
Right.
And you want to be loose and say, let's increase the computation, crunch, and let's do a lot more steps. Let's not just do 20 steps. Let's do 20,000 steps in generating this thing. And then it's going to be incredibly gnarly and rich and beautiful. And so I think it can be done. On the other thing, when you're in the space of art, it's it's like a Hilbert space with infinitely many dimensions. There's so many things you can go towards, and then how do you find your way? And that's where the human mind, again, working at our full ability, we're bringing in not just your mind, you've got your heart in it, your emotions. And at some point, I notice this when I'm writing, when I'm really in the zone, things start happening around me, or it feels that way. It feels like the universe begins dancing with me. And I'll see just the thing I need to see, and I'll hear the thing I need to hear, and the thing I've been writing about, I'll open it up, and there it is. And that's something. I don't think we could readily create an algorithm that runs on an Intel chip that's going to do that for us.
You don't think so?
No.
Even what about some of the newer, multi-core GPUs that are basically?
Well, I mean, it can be decent. It can be better than it used to.
Right.
And again, I mean, the cellular automata, it will make an image that's incredibly beautiful art. So I guess I'm very suspicious always of people that get overexcited about what it's like a stupid pet trick that AI has done.
Right.
I used to teach AI at San Jose State. It's a bunch of cheap tricks.
What do you think? What do you think now? I mean, obviously AI is a hot subject right now.
It's getting better because all of a sudden, we used to do neural nets, and then we always just had like 2 or 3 layers in the neural net.
Right.
And now the big thing now, deep learning, you might have 5 or 6 layers.
Right.
And that's huge. And the reason we didn't do it before was because it's the computational expense of training on that like that. And the other thing that's happening is Google's into it. They've got do they call it Google Brain?
Yeah, where it's inventing itself.
Yeah, and well, the thing is they've got the big data. They've got, ungodly amounts of data to crunch on.
Right.
And they can farm some of their computation out to lots of other machines. And they can actually be sort of testing it in how people relate to it.
Right.
So I think there is something there where it could get pretty far. Another aspect of AI that I don't think is stressed enough is that it comes back to being a variation on the cruddy old ELIZA program. The thing is, if I have a super big database of somebody, like I'm making an idea that I've always been interested, I used to be more interested than I am now, this thing I call a life box.
Yeah.
And I would make an AI program or a website that could emulate me. And so you could go there and talk to it, and it would be the same as talking to me. Like, you could be doing this interview, and I wouldn't be here. Instead, my laptop would be here, and it would be answering with much the same kinds of answers that I'm giving now.
Why would you want to do that?
I wonder. Well, I used to want to do it because I was afraid of dying. And I thought, then that's a type of immortality.
Right.
And that was the thing.
I remember that from
software.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, software was the first science fiction novel that was based on the idea of somebody's brain being uploaded into a computer.
Right.
I mean, now that idea is a cliche.
Right.
But it was incredibly hard to come up with that idea.
When was this?
In 1978 and 79, I thought of it.
Right.
I had a 2-year grant at the University of Heidelberg in Germany to study mathematical logic.
Uh-huh.
And there is this essay by Kurt Gödel about the possibility of robot intelligence. And slowly, I realized that we couldn't write the program, but we could evolve it. And again, that's sort of a truism now.
Right.
A really complicated thing.
But deep learning now is all about evolution.
Yeah, it's all about evolution because you can't figure it out. It's too hard to figure out. You evolve it. And the other thing that I figured out was that if I had all the data, I could emulate myself, and it would actually be a fairly cheap computation because I wouldn't have to have this huge degree of like Minsky used to dream of, having machines that would think logically and do all that stuff that supposedly we do,
Right.
but which in fact we don't do. Very little logic going on. So much of what I think is just association. I just dive in, I grab something that's associated with what I just mentioned, and then I patch it together, and it looks like an idea, it looks like a sentence, it looks like a paragraph. And so that's where I think if we would get these huge databases, that's why the Google Brain has a leg up.
Right.
And what I've done in terms of realizing my own life box was I've made sure that as much of my writing as possible is online. So you can I already wrote a little page. It's called Rudy's Life Box, and you can use Google search, and it'll just search my website.
Mm-hmm.
And I've it's several gig by now on my website, and basically I'm trying to get every one of my books there. The thing is, if you want to sell your books, you have to be a little careful about how you put them online. But if I put a book online as a web page, that's fairly harmless.
Right.
If somebody's serious about it, of course, they can snarf down the web page and use Calibre to turn it into an ebook, but
Well,
whatever. At least I'm
good.
immortal.
Yeah, at least you're immortal, right? So that is I've listened to. There's a lot of people who have an amazing body of work, and they feel an obligation to share that with a lot of people. One of the other people I've talked to, and he's been on my podcast before, is a fantastic photographer named Norman Seif,
Mm-hmm.
and he's photographed like every celebrity from the 70s, 80s, and 90s and stuff. And he did the famous photograph of Steve Jobs and Ray Charles and all of those guys. And he has such a huge library of content that he's created and he owns that he wants to do something very similar. He wants to put it up online to show everything, but give it context. That's the other. His biggest problem is giving it context.
Yes.
So what is the context? What is the context of your work?
Well, I mean, the books, there's a page about each book, and then the book is a file off that. I have my blog, which is the sort of narrative thread.
Right.
I put my journals online, and you can search it, but to give it the context, you basically need the bot that...
You need a box.
A bot, yeah, the life box, the BOT.
Yeah.
But I don't have it together to write that, but it would be a fairly simple front end, where it would remember the things that you said to it. It would make a file for you so it wouldn't repeat itself.
Right.
And it would remember the things it said to you, so it's not like, your grandfather telling the same story twice in a row.
That happens now.
A lot, yeah. I had guys who were doing that in our 20s, but...
Yeah.
But, so it's a pretty lightweight front end if you have all that data. It doesn't really need to do that much. It's mainly just do a quick search and then maybe slight massage, textual massage to make it look like it fits. That's actually how, when somebody asks you a question, you do a search on some tidbit that is triggered by that, and you act like that's the answer.
It's the answer I have.
Yeah.
But okay, so it kind of brings up an idea of, there's and I forget, you'll probably tell me exactly who it was, but there was someone who told me about this idea that the closer we are to actually being able to simulate life,
Yes.
the closer it is to reality that we actually living in a simulation.
The closer it is to what?
If the closer we are to actually simulating life, the closer to reality is that we are actually living in a simulation.
Oh, that's a whole... People have been talking about that this week. There's an interesting post on the New Yorker. They have a page, and there's this writer, Adam Gopnik. He's a good writer, essayist. And he just posted something saying that the Trump election plus the flub of the Academy Awards proves that we're living in a simulation.
Really? So
Yeah.
what's his theory?
Well, that such, and also the Super Bowl, you know.
Okay, right, all right.
Because these things where these completely wrong and unexpected events happen, so that's, I mean, somebody could argue if they wanted to that this means that there's a bug in the operating system
Right.
that's simulating our world.
And once that bug happened, it just continuously manifests itself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But this, let's wait for that to go down.
sure.
It's hard to filter that stuff out too.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay,
So-
there. So you were talking about the idea: do we live in a simulation? And I think that's an idea that has currency now. It's like a religious belief. I'm not exactly sure why people want to believe that. It's partly has to do with it. You spend so much of your time looking at your computer and your smartphone that starts to seem like reality. But it's complete bullshit.
Yeah,
And again, there's reasons that are fairly reasonable scientific things. I mean, our world is a quantum computation. It's made of an octillion atoms. Each of them is, vibrating, doing something very intricate all the time. And to think you're going to jam that down onto a chip is absurd,
yeah,
And people will say, well, what about computronium? Which doesn't mean anything. It's a made-up word. It doesn't actually have any meaning.
okay.
And they'll say, well, I'll put together some nano machines and simulate a blade of grass, And well, that's what a blade of grass is.
Right.
It's a bunch of nanomachines, also known as elementary particles, that are simulating a blade of grass,
Right.
And you're not gonna stand on your own shoulders. You're not gonna get ahead of it. And if you go into VR, I mean, you can have fun in VR, but it's always, if you lean close and look really close, I mean, after a while you see the triangles,
Yeah.
and you see the little holes and the colors. At some point, the granularity of the colors shows up, and it's cheesy. It's always going to be cheesy. It's never going to stop being cheesy. And it's just a ridiculous idea to want to believe that you live in a simulated reality. It's this like life-hating, anti-Gaia, overly male disassociation from, our vibrant natural world.
Right.
And I try to get out in nature as much as I can, and I'm just always intoxicated by the richness.
And don't you think that a lot of nature, why are we fascinated by nature?
Oh, we're part of it.
Well,
It's the mother. It's the divine mother.
Right. So why do you think nature is so important to us? Because I agree it is. But
Well, it's the most complicated thing that there is.
Right.
It's the biggest thing there is. It's the richest thing there is. And Bruce Sterling, when they were first doing VR, he said these environments, you want to see somebody get in there with a spray can,
Yeah.
But now, I mean, they've done that. I mean, there's things. I mean, certainly. I mean, I respect these worlds, like these funky, complicated worlds that you can go into. I mean, they're fun to look at, but I just think it's sad if you think that playing that is as interesting as going to the beach or taking a hike in the woods.
Yeah.
I'm an old man here shaking my finger.
Well, I spend a lot of time dealing with the subject of VR because it's a subject that a lot of people are interested in, and they want it to look as good as possible. And
Sure.
So now ray tracing is becoming a very important part of VR because there's only so much you can do in real time. So I spend a lot of time looking at this in the context of it, and I think there's a lot of. I think VR is going to serve a really great purpose for a specific thing. Mm-hmm. And I think for the design process, as an example, like architecture, design, and VR.
Yeah, VR is great.
would be great for that. But I think one of the things I have a hard time with is the context of people creating entertainment in VR. Because I just don't, specifically like the movie making, why they're trying to make movies in VR just doesn't make any sense for me. Why not just go to the movies?
Well, it's tempting because it's a new medium. I mean,
I don't see myself.
I don't
putting on a
despise
headset for 2
VR.
hours.
Yeah, I mean, I could like to. If the headsets got better and better, I'd like to see. Really, I mean, even the Google Cardboard isn't all that bad. It's funny. Last year, my Sunday Times was in the driveway, and there was a Google Cardboard attached to it. It just came free, and then I went online and looked at this very cool art video that the New York Times had put up. And I was very impressed.
Yeah.
I mean, VR, it's exciting, but when I was working at Autodesk, VR's had these peaks. It was its first peak back then. It was like the Jaron Lanier period.
The 90s. Right?
Yeah, and people thought it was going to be the big thing. And then what happened was it went into video games, and it wasn't being used for surgery or architecture. And the video game guys, they really ran with it. And video games, it's very good VR. And you're not necessarily wearing goggles, but it's an immersive 3D environment.
Sure.
And it's, and now they've got the newer goggles, they're better. But I think it's, people want to see it. We like this thing. We're monkeys. We like to fiddle with things.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see anything wrong with VR. I just think, the thing I was arguing about a second ago is if you get too sort of entranced with it. I mean, like at one time people thought the universe was a clock, or they thought the universe was an epic poem, or the universe is a painting,
Sure.
It's just like whatever you're interested in, the universe is a good high,
Sure.
What a hallucination. Whatever you're interested in, you say, well, that's what everything is, but it's all of those things.
Right.
And it's, it's not going to live inside a chip.
It's not going to live inside a chip.
No.
Which is funny to hear you say that, because a lot of what you write about is kind of about things living inside of chips.
That's not really what I write about.
But there are things that go on inside of silicon that are happening.
Yeah. I mean, the robots are intelligent, and in Hacker and the Ants, that's sort of, they're in the VR there some of the time. And there's a funny thing there where he's in the VR and he doesn't know that he is.
Right.
That's a trick the hackers are playing on each other. They call it putting him on the dark dream.
Okay.
Convincing him that he's awake,
Right.
and then really fucking with him,
Yeah.
There was an episode like that on Black Glass.
Uh-huh.
Black Glass had some great stuff. I think it was the Christmas one with the guy from Mad Men.
Yeah.
John Hamm.
Yeah.
Or there's another one where there's a guy, he was testing out a game, supposedly. And that thing where you lose it and you can't tell which is which. And it's an interesting thing to write about and think about, whether it's going to be happening very often. I mean, it might happen sometimes. It's not all bad. But the thing is, I guess the reason it annoys me if somebody say this could just be a simulated reality, if you degrade, it's sort of like Trump with the fake news. If I start saying this is a fake universe, then it doesn't really matter if we fuck Earth up. If we rape it, it doesn't matter. It's a fake universe. And if you start saying the real news is fake, it's like if somebody wants to ruin a country's currency, they print a lot of counterfeit money.
Right.
And they distribute it, and then all the money starts to seem, it's debased currency. It starts to seem fake. And if you're posting lies and just steadfastly declaiming lies and saying that they're true, you're debasing and then flipping it to say the real news is the fake news. Right. It's just so diabolic, really.
Right.
And to me, well, we're all sensitive these days. We're going through a really horrible, difficult time. But to be saying that our universe is a simulation, it's an aspect of that same sort of mindset. It's debasing reality, saying it doesn't matter.
It puts less value on reality.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't necessarily believe in myself. I think it's an interesting idea, but I think, I have responsibilities as a living, real person.
Yeah.
That and implications to my actions.
Yeah.
That I don't have when I play video games.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, whenever you do that for a while, and then you're in your car, you just, where's the cruise missile?
Right. Yeah. But okay, so you mentioned a little bit about AI, and so there was another really great sort of quote that I remember listening to. I think it was the Infinite Monkey Tree podcast, and they were talking about how AI right now it's much easier to write an incredibly intelligent piece of software that can play chess or Go or whatever. But it's infinitely harder to write a program that figures out how to make a cup of tea in someone else's kitchen.
Sure, right. Yeah, the easy problem is playing chess. The hard problem is finding the chessboard.
Right.
and picking up the pieces.
Yeah.
The things we take for granted. And most of that, or not most of it, but a lot of it is hardwired into our brain. So it's not, those are the kind of things that are hard to emulate because they got in our brain by a million years of evolution. Mm-hmm. Something that you can teach somebody, that's
a very deep learning process.
That's simple to teach somebody something. But the stuff that you're born with, the firmware, that's the stuff that it just got there over, as I say, millennia of slow evolution. And that's, again, they're hip to that now. They say, well, if we're going to get there, we're just going to have to do the evolution ourselves. And the thing about evolution, I used to work on artificial life programs. That was big in like 1986. And there's this dream that we were going to have little critters in our computers and they were going to evolve and get really good. And then they never got very far. And then the catch is that the evolution, well, it takes place on the entire planet and there's a billion entities involving and they're being updated continuously in real time for tens of thousands of years.
Right.
And it's just, you can't shortcut. I mean, you can shortcut a little bit, but
it's not like the computers are going to be, it's the kind of thing that you were saying earlier, like it's at the limit of its abilities, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that computers are going to get faster? Or do you think that they are going to, do you think quantum computers are actually going to make a difference?
Oh yeah, I think in 100 years we won't be using digital chips at all.
Yeah.
We'll have something else.
What kind of chips are we using?
Computation is a type of analog computation, and it's not clear if that's going to work or not. It's, there's all these problems with decoherence, and it's just, it might come together, it might not. But I'm sure there will be some other kind of continuous analog process, biological, something like that that's going to kick the ass of digital chips. And why wouldn't it be? I mean, 100 years ago we didn't have them. Why would you expect that 100 years ago we'd be using the same thing?
Right.
It'll be something different. And as soon as you can get into the idea of using matter, well, in a way, any material object is a computer, as I never tire of saying. It's full. I mean, it's got the quantum computation going, or if you just want to think about it, you can think of the particles in there. It's like they're coupled by springs, so it's like all these vibrating atoms, and it's doing this huge amount of computation. It's not computing anything that we care about. It's basically what we need is I/O for a rock. Okay, the rock's your computer, but we don't have the input-output.
Right.
But I don't see why it shouldn't be feasible.
And you can just use the molecules that are inside the rock as your computer.
Yes.
Do you just give them different directions, or you just basically use the atoms as memory?
I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work. I don't think the right idea is to think of it being like a von Neumann architecture. Okay. I think it'll be something different.
Okay. It's interesting. All right, so if you don't necessarily have, well, do you think there's going to be a split at some point where, VR is starting to become more popular? Let's say it does take off this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think there is going to be a split between those two worlds? Do you think there's going to be a world where people are on one side and then there's the other one's the reality world?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by the split. Some people who spend all their time in VR.
Some people spend most of their time in VR. Some people spend most of their time out of VR. And people separate into different types of people.
I mean, how much of your time can you spend in VR? I don't know. In a way, I mean, even looking at your smartphone is a type of VR because you're not present.
Right.
You know, you're in cyberspace, if you like. You're looking at Twitter, your Facebook, whatever. And that's, I used to, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I used to look down on people who walked around with their smartphone. I thought they were idiots.
Right.
And poking at this little device. That was before I got an iPhone.
and
now,
started poking at the little device.
yeah, and it's this thing. If they've done, experiments with rats. If you push the lever, you'll get a food pellet.
Right.
And what works the best if it's partial reinforcement. You don't always get a food pellet.
Right.
You only get a food pellet, and it's unpredictable.
Right.
That's the most addictive, it turns out.
Right.
And that's how the phone is for us. I'll go push the email button, no pellet.
Yeah.
Push the Twitter button. Anybody commented on my posts?
Right.
And it's funny, and I always want to do it less, and then it's so much become a default. So, yeah, I am actually one of those person that's in the VR there. Though I try not to be, I'll say I've got to get off the computer and go for a bike ride.
Right.
And depending what I'm doing that morning, either I manage to get out or I don't.
Right. I always find, especially now it's a good example, and you mentioned this before because it's a stressful time. If ever I want to feel stressed, all I have to do is get on Facebook.
Yes, because all anybody posts about is the politics.
Everything is so negative. People feel the need to shout.
Yes.
People don't do that. You're not seeing people shouting when you talk to them in real life.
Yes. Twitter's a little bit lighter. Somehow, there's more fun things on Twitter.
Yeah.
Facebook's... Well, what I do now, every time somebody posts about politics on Facebook, I instantly unfollow them.
Right.
I don't unfriend them, but there's this choice where you're not going to see their posts anymore.
Right.
If there's a cat, out of there.
Don't like cat stuff?
No,
cats are like this sweet relief to me in some ways.
It depends. Now, a dog, I like to see a dog.
Okay.
But it's a personal thing. But, yeah.
Dogs or cats, it's just like, oh, thank God it's not another post. It's
I'm sort of
at someone.
allergic to cats. That's my problem.
Okay, well... But yeah, I just wondering about the idea that people act so... people that I know...
They get
that
more
are very
uptight.
Nice. They get so much more vocal. Like I would never actually be friends with this person if they only spoke the way they do on social
Facebook.
network.
Yeah.
Because I know they're better people than that. So that's why it's hard for me to unfollow them.
Well, I have some friends like that. I know exactly what you mean. Where if you see them, they're genial and they're joking about everything. Mm-hmm. But there they get into this sort of shock cone.
Yeah. But do you think that if that's a VR world, if that's the reality, is that just because that's the persona they wish they could just have, and they feel they can sort of shout out into their darkness with some anonymous,
I don't know. It's like
not even anonymous.
Well,
voice.
if you go to a psychologist, you're probably not going to talk about the things that you're happy about.
Right.
I mean, it's sort of like free group counseling. I mean, there's that group therapy aspect to share, but if it's just a circle of people bringing each other down, it's just you have to control. It's up to you. You have to say I'm gonna unfollow anybody that's posting that stuff. Not that I don't like them, but I can't look at it.
Right. I'm
not gonna watch the president on TV tonight. I'm just not gonna do it. It just I can't handle it.
Right.
We've had other bad presidents, and I lived through Nixon. And both the Bushes and Reagan, and it was hard at times, but you get through it.
Yeah, you do.
I have to it's a struggle, but I have to remember to take. It's my own life. It's up to me.
Right.
I mean, I need to just do things that you say. Well, why aren't you calling the congressman all the time? Well, I need to have a life.
Right.
I'm going to be dead in 10 years probably.
Okay.
Why shouldn't I be painting and programming and writing and going to the beach? I can keep doing that before they put me in prison.
Why would they put you in prison?
I don't know. All sorts of reasons. I'm not going to admit to them.
Okay. But I think that there's, it's interesting. I don't necessarily always talk about politics, but it was from my daughter's perspective, right? Because she's 10 years old. This is her first election that she remembers. And stuff. And so there is an air of panic that happens in kids, like, oh my God, what's going to happen to our life? And there's no context.
Yes.
So my wife and I always let her know, it's like, the good thing about our political system, generally speaking, is that it's very hard for an individual person to actually do damage.
As much as they want to, anyway.
We're certainly testing the waters right now to see how true that really is.
Yes. Well, it is, the checks and balances.
Yeah. But I don't really know what I can do except to do, I guess the best revenge is living well in hell, right?
To some extent, and keep it together and keep a sense of humor and, Well, we're in California anyway.
Right.
It's almost like being in a different country.
Yeah. It is very different. Just hearing the rhetoric that we hear from a lot of the people in the Midwest and stuff, which I think is fascinating. I think that people in California just don't necessarily understand how that even happened. Which I think would be, if they really want to do something, instead of just sitting yelling at the darkness, they should just go out there and find out why that happened in the first place.
Well, I've heard that thought expressed. Yeah.
But from my point of view,
take some road trips.
I love road trips.
Me too. I love road trips.
That's probably gonna be the script I write will be based on a road trip.
Yeah, and you get into a screaming political argument with every single person that you meet.
Do you?
No.
No, you don't.
No.
Yeah. You don't. I think you get some very.
Well, you avoid it. People don't want to talk about that. Anybody, they're sick of it.
Right.
Well, I don't know. Are we done?
Yeah, we're pretty close to done. Is there anything do you think is important that we should that you want to wrap up about or talk about or let people know to go check your blog out, obviously?
Well, sure. I think I've hit all the things that I want to talk about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
if you go to my webpages, you can find whatever it is I'm currently trying to sell.
Not photography.
No, but my paintings, my books.
Yeah.
I self-published a lot of my books recently.
So how do you self-publish books? That's an interesting thing.
Well, for years, I had the commercial publishers in New York were doing my books.
Right.
And now the structure of those companies has changed. They're more geared towards having, the $100,000 copy selling book.
Right.
And I'm more of a 10,000 copy selling author. And so they didn't want to carry me anymore. So that's the way I've been publishing lately is I write the book, I do a Kickstarter to get the equivalent of an advance.
Right.
I might, pick up $5,000 or $10,000 that way. And then you can make a Kindle book very easily. There's a product, there's something called KDP, the Kindle Developers Platform. And basically it's, there's various ways to do it. I've written about online. It's basically you're just creating a web page of your book, and then you wrap it up inside a Kindle file.
Uh-huh.
It's not too hard to do. Well, I'm a computer science professor, and it took me about a year to learn how to do it. It's not that hard.
It's not that hard.
But you can do it kind of badly pretty easily.
Right.
It's how
do you promote your book? Just through social media?
I have the social media. I have about 7,000 followers on Twitter and maybe 4,000 Facebook friends. I've got my blog, which gets a lot of hits.
Yeah.
And Boing Boing will often mention something. I'm sort of old friends with them.
Oh, okay.
And then for the paperback, again, you go through Amazon. They sort of own the world now. And you get InDesign and use InDesign software to design a really nice looking book. You know,
Sure.
Word isn't good enough. You want to make it look better than that.
Right.
And then you upload the PDF to Amazon, and then they have it on file, and it's presented as a book that they have for sale.
But they print it on demand, don't they?
They print it on demand. That's become sort of a dirty word, print on demand, because it used to mean like really shitty looking books in the 90s, you know?
Yeah.
And now, so we don't really say print on demand, but that's what it is. But now the technology has gotten so it looks just like any other quality paperback.
Well, that's great.
In no respect does it look different.
That's great. And so that's much easier for you than going through the publisher's now.
It sure is.
Yeah.
And you get most of the money, you know. The publisher will give you like 10%, you know, or 5% of what they get. The difference is you don't get into bookstores. In principle, the bookstores can order the books from you, or from Amazon, or there's also Lightning, a company called Lightning. They distribute it too. They're a part of Ingram.
Right.
But they tend not to order those in. So
Well, how many books have you written so far?
40.
40?
Yeah.
And how many have you done self-published?
I've done the last 4 or 5.
Okay.
You can find them at transrealbooks.com.
Okay.
Transrealbooks.com.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think this is perfect, Rudy. I really appreciate you doing this.
Well, nice to see you, Christopher.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming up. It's fun to discuss all these things.
All right. Thanks.